movie Grease.
This group likes to joke, so you have to be
Yeah.
careful. And the democracy got started because there was one dictator who was one-man rule, and he got overthrown by somebody who asked the Spartans to come in and throw this guy out. And then after a while, the population didn't like the new guy, so they, for the first time in history, rose up and threw the new guy out and restored the previous guy. And he figured, I can't just take over again. Mm-hmm. Not when we have a popular uprising. So he decided to institute a popular assembly with pebbles, mm-hmm. and so on. Well, okay. That's how it got started. That by itself was interesting. And then they got to somebody else whose name begins with a T. He's a general, and he upset, the Phoenicians came over to take over Greece twice, and the Greeks were hugely outnumbered. They beat them twice. Mm-hmm. Once at Marathon and once in the sea battle. Okay. We had to take it. Salamis. Take a great risk of building 200 ships. Convinced the Athenians to build the ships, which was very expensive, but they just found a whole bunch of silver. So they had the money, and they built the ships, and then he was right. Xerxes, the son of Darius, came back, and they beat him at this Salamis.
Was the sea battle.
Battle. Okay, so this guy, this general, is like, he saved Athens twice. Mm-hmm. And they had they decided to institute a protection for the democracy of once a year they could vote one person out of the city, somebody that they felt was getting too big for his britches.
Huh. So popular vote to basically ostracise people. That's interesting.
Yeah. It was social club.
Reality put him off the island.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Dick Cheney. I nominate.
And okay, they would vote out write a name on a pottery shard, which was called an ostra.
Ostra.
That's the name ostracized.
Mm.
Oh.
The thing is, then at some point somebody figured that this general that saved Athens twice was getting too powerful. Mm-hmm. So he got ostracized. Mm-hmm. Only, and here's the twist for this group, they found in some old cafe a whole bunch of ostras, pottery shards, in which his name had been written. Mm-hmm. And the writing was very similar.
Valid stuff.
It was a rigged election.
It was an unearned ostracism.
Maybe the first rigged election in the history of democracy.
No, just the first one where there's some record.
Because they had an audit trail.
That's why you need to vote on tablets.
Maybe we should reinstitute that.
It's durable, voter verifiable.
And then you can check the handwriting.
Well, the people were illiterate, so they may have been, here, this is a vote for Philip.
And he goes, no.
And he puts it in the urn.
Isn't this the same thing that what was it, LBJ got elected?
Oh, he's
first time. All 113 of the registered voters on this Indian reservation signed in alphabetically with the same handwriting. Mm-hmm. And all two of them voted for LBJ, and it magically gave him the, what he needed to win, right? His first congressional seat.
Yeah, LBJ was pretty notorious. I understand that his henchmen would, that's a pejorative term, isn't it? His helpers would ride with the sheriffs to bring the ballots back from the polling places to the...
Make sure they got safe. Mm-hmm.
I heard he lost his first election, and he figured out, he found out it was stolen, and he learned from that how to win in Texas.
How to win in Texas.
So
a challenge, I think.
So
what's up?
we did our light talk to start with.
Oh, I don't know if I want any
Oh,
more.
I'd love some water, thank you very much.
There's more cups back there.
So I have a slight...
There are cups in the kitchen if you want tea too.
Thank you.
You have a slight.
Update, so I was in Denver
Oh, yeah.
last Monday
Mm-hmm.
at the Denver Dominion demo event. I got to meet the new Colorado Secretary of State and pinged them, and they're going to bring me into. We're going to talk a little bit about what Dominion is up to, and then a little about what Colorado is up to in more generality. So, they're planning to have pilot tests of 5 voting systems. They're trying to go to this uniform voting system model where everybody uses the same brand of equipment. The 5 are Dominion, ES&S, HART, and then everyone counts and clear ballot. So everyone counts doesn't really have a certified voting system, and their stuff is horribly exposed to the internet in both directions. And clear ballot have a technology that could be perfectly usable as a voting system. Once upon a time, I was on their advisory board, but I've really soured on them as human beings, and don't really, I'm kind of concerned.
So what were the first 3 again? Dominion, ES&S?
ES&S and HART. So since Colorado is supposed to be going to risk limiting audits in 2017, I suggested to the Secretary of State that they might want to see how auditable these systems are as part of their pilots. So they're now planning to try each of the voting systems in 2 jurisdictions, at least one of which will be doing a risk limiting audit using the voting system. And that'll be happening over the next, roughly a year, I think. Probably expecting something to start in July.
I can't help but ask, has it not already occurred to the Secretary of State until you pointed it out?
Yeah, there was a good idea to see whether it really would help solve their needs in 2 years, and that give more jurisdictions some experience with it. Well, they haven't reached out before that. I don't know whether they're curriculum or not. But he's new to office this year.
Okay.
In your paper, you talk about direct comparisons and, I guess...
Comparison and ballot polling, yeah.
And so, are any of these systems...
They're supposed to support ballot level comparison audits.
Okay.
That's the goal. That's what they're trying to do. Dominion, so the basic sketch is, in order to do that, the voting system has to tell you how it interpreted each piece of paper in such a way that you can go find the piece of paper and check. And vice versa, given any ballot, you should be able to locate the cast vote record that goes with the ballot. Dominion has been pushing really hard to eliminate the paper, not in the sense of not voting on paper, but once the paper is scanned, they don't want the local election official ever to have to touch the paper again. And I'm crying foul saying, that's not an audit. You can't audit by comparing to pictures, and there's a lot of reasons you can't do that.
Right.
But at any rate, they're willing to listen. They kind of seem to understand. They're disappointed, but I think they don't have a choice. And so their mechanism for linking the cast vote record to the paper, they have 2 proposals. One is the standard one of keep the ballots in the same order that you scanned them in, and then they match up to the images because they're in the same order. Anybody who's ever tried to count into a stack of 500 or 1,000 ballots to find the right ballot that way knows this is not an easy thing to do, and it's especially not an easy thing to do thousands of times. Moreover, anybody who's handled a lot of ballots has seen a stack of them fall on the floor, which is not optimal for keeping their order.
Terminology here, in case people don't know what cast vote record.
I'm sorry?
Cast vote record.
Does that mean something, everybody?
No.
Explain please.
So, it's basically the interpretation of the vote, saying a cast vote record would be saying this piece of paper has a vote for Abraham Lincoln on it. So
It'll be a text-based list or something.
Ultimately it should be, but basically what it is it's the voting equipment's interpretation of a ballot, of the votes on the ballot, the marks on the ballot.
In some kind of order.
in some way that can be unpacked. It could be done as XML, it could be done as comma separated values, it could be done in something, but it's got to be something that somebody else can interpret, and it also needs to be, before the audit starts, it needs to be exported from the voting system, so that the voting system is in effect committed to its interpretation. It's so that it can't change in the course of the audit to say, oh, you're looking at that piece of paper, what did that say? Oh, yeah. But basically it's the interpretation of it. There are some currently deployed voting systems that don't make a cast vote record. For example, the old Premier or GEMS stuff is basically just an accumulator. When you run a ballot through its kind of mark sense thing, it just increments a counter. So if it sees a vote for Lincoln, it just increments a counter for Lincoln. It doesn't say that piece of paper has a vote for Abraham Lincoln, and I'm going to remember that. So
And there is still a lot of those around?
there are,
systems?
yeah, I think Marin County is still using it, among
Wow.
others. So it's a lot harder to audit because you then have to audit large subtotals like entire precincts instead of
Yeah.
being able to check individual ballots, which is just a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
So the other mechanism that Dominion is proposing for being able to match the cast vote record to the paper is they said they could print a random number on the ballot as they were scanning it. And that's a great way to do it. You need a little bit more to happen if you want to really make it very usable. So first of all, you need to make sure that the random numbers don't get repeated. You need something called a nonce, which is a number once thing, so that it's a number where the numbers aren't in any particular order. Secondly, ideally, there would be some way of OCRing that number when you scanned the ballot so that you knew without sort of opening the file what ballot it's supposed to be representing, right? So that you can go find the cast vote record that corresponds to a particular number ballot.
Would it be easier and possible to put numbers in order? Or
The
is
problem
there
with putting the numbers in order is you have a much bigger risk of violating voter anonymity. Because the time at which someone casts the ballot is then associated with the number on the ballot. If you know what order people voted in, you know what order, and you know the order of the numbers.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. Anyway, so pushing on them in Denver, they said, oh, well, we're not actually providing that functionality. We're relying on the commercial off-the-shelf Canon scanners to print the random numbers on the ballots. And what we mean by a random number is a time of day and a sequence number.
That's random, huh?
So there's a bit of a disconnect there. But I'm hoping that we can talk to the Canon scanner folks and whatnot and find a better solution. So that, at the moment, they're not quite there for reliable auditing, but.
I was just thinking, if you print a random number on it, how would you find that ballot to compare it in your audit?
The idea would be if you pull the cast vote record, you have the random number, and you would sort of need to know, for example, what boxes had what numbers in them.
Right.
And in the other direction, though, if you pull a piece of paper, the number should let you track down the cast vote record that goes with it. So you kind of need, in the same sense, you need that random number to be on the outside of the cast vote record, not buried in some image associated with the cast vote record. There's stuff to work out.
I think maybe we ought to start here. This is all very interesting, but maybe we should start.
Yeah, what do you guys want to hear about?
It sounds critical, actually. I mean, we should take this up again later, because if these companies aren't prepared to offer the features that make these audits possible,
Yeah.
and any legislation that's passed or
There
any,
was something in AB 44 about that, but that was vague, and you can bring up that too.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it said any system sold after 2016 was supposed to be able to be audited,
Accommodate
whatever.
risk limiting audits, but it didn't define what that meant.
Right, they might take that time, date stamp and unique
Well,
serial number and say that should, you know.
the Colorado Secretary of State's office had the brilliant idea of asking the vendors to write down what their best practices were for conducting a risk limiting audit of their systems, because it's clear that some of them don't really even know what a risk limiting audit is. And so getting them to commit to something is a really good way of nailing it
They
down.
just gave you some business as a seminar leader.
I was gonna say,
Teaching.
or a consultant.
Right.
Yeah, if you were.
Yeah.
This is something my charge for litigation consulting election integrity is because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I just want to, bottom line though, there were 5 systems
5 systems.
they're reviewing, and how many of those had a capacity for this limiting audits?
They are all claiming to. That's part of this thing that the inspector's supposed to be bidding to. Whether in fact they do is another story that it will shake out over the next year or
So
so.
they're all in
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about Dominion, this is just one of these about which you happen to know more than maybe some
Because
of the others.
they had the demo last week.
Right,
You
okay.
know,
Yeah.
the others yet to be determined.
Is this the same Dominion system that was demoed in
Democracy
California?
Suite.
It is a democracy suite. I can't remember the model. I actually have photos.
Because,
I have
It's
a
a-
page on my website about it. The interface is the worst I have seen ever.
Oh, yeah, this was on the.
it's probably
You
the
told me that,
same
and
version.
I looked at it, and one of the things that happened was the overvote, or undervote. I had undervoted in some contest, and when you get to the summary screen before casting your vote, it says, you undervoted, go fix it. But I couldn't see from that which contest I had undervoted in, and I had to go back through the whole.
That's nice.
That's probably one of the gentler flaws.
Right. Yeah.
The navigation, I mean, it's like, especially if you're used to touchpads and things like that, it's weird to have you have to touch the arrow, but they say that that's the,
Are you holding
BBSG.
a device?
no, it's a tablet-based device on a, mounted in a
Different.
security container. They don't, I mean, I can show you the questions I asked them too, and they didn't have very good answers to any of them. What am I looking for? First of all, photo. Well, things like, how do you, they're using an Android device. It's like, how do you secure Android? How do you turn off all the radios to make sure that, you know, oops.
Are they using that wireless?
Well, I mean, the Android devices that they've got Bluetooth and Wi-Fi in them. How do they shut that off? And are they customizing Android, or are they using the default that Samsung provided? I mean, it's like all of these things like,
California, that's
so here's the device, which is, you know, got this touch, this is basically a Samsung tablet in a plastic box to make it tamper resistant, and then a printer next to it, and another shot of the same thing. Of course, one of the two devices crashed during the demo.
Of course.
Usually it would clear the demo and then crash in the election, but
You know, it's fine in elections.
Right.
So, yeah, this was like the series of screens, voter in English or Spanish. I can imagine if your LA County have 23 languages, that might be a little tough.
Right.
Then, you know, you
show me the Spanish again.
Well,
Which
yeah,
one is, can you go back?
no, yeah, sure.
There's just 2 lines, right? English or Spanish?
It was just English and Spanish is all they had there.
And the other 21 you have to type in and see if it comes up.
No, I mean, it's not that. I mean, presumably they list all the languages, but if you're LA County, that's a very long list, and it won't all fit on one screen.
Amazing.
So you have to page down to find the next page of languages to select. Then, you know, this is like, you know, voting percent. The scroll up, you have to touch the scroll up thing and touch the scroll down. There's no actual, you know, try to scroll with anything. Yes, you can do write-ins.
Okay. Like
Lizard people.
Lizard people.
We like lizard people.
Yeah, we do. So that was like a summary screen.
I didn't think they knew about them in college.
Well, there wasn't a qualified write-in. It was a write-in. This is me. This is me voting.
Uh-oh. You're voting.
Yeah, and then they print the ballot, and it prints your selections, and it gives you a QR code, which is a little spooky.
Yeah,
Because what else is in there?
I don't read it.
Well, worse.
Yeah.
Take your cell phone
Yeah.
to try to read the QR code.
Yeah.
It's a binary QR code. It doesn't translate to plain text. The write-in comes out in plain text, but all the other selections don't.
That was not interesting.
So you can't verify what it has.
What's in it?
What's in it?
Well, I suppose someone could crack it and verify, right? I mean, or not the, but not the average citizen.
But how do you know that the QR code actually represents what was in the voter
You don't.
record?
Right, right.
Yeah. And you don't know whether it represents it, nor do you know whether it has other stuff in it about you, for instance.
Right, right.
Because there you are with a tablet that has a front-facing camera. You can have your photo in there.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
Or
Recording.
you don't cover the camera.
I don't remember whether they did or didn't. But,
That should be.
I mean, in principle, the whole point is that
Yeah.
it shouldn't, anyway.
Plus, this is a Samsung device. Wouldn't it naturally be wireless connected? I mean,
It's going to have all that stuff by default. Whether they go to the trouble of modifying the operating system to turn it off is another story. So,
and
You
how does
can't
that?
depend on election officials.
Oh, God.
no, with the vendors. So every question I asked about does it do this, is that, it's like, well, that's up to the election official. I'll let me find the,
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, sure.
open.
This is a
This is a
train
disaster.
covering the tracks.
Oh, God.
It's okay. So it's progress in the sense that they're basing this on a commercial off-the-shelf tablet, commercial off-the-shelf scanner, commercial off-the-shelf printer. That's progress. This is probably not any worse security than what's already out there. And it's going to be a lot less expensive for jurisdictions, and it can be made auditable relatively easily. That said, they haven't really thought it through. So it's
And what would get counted? Would that little square that's not readable, I forget what you call it, the
QR code.
QR code, is that actually what you think might be, I mean, we don't know.
That's what, well, okay, so if you do an audit,
Right.
what you'll do is you'll audit the cast vote record against the human readable portion of the ballot.
Okay.
Right, so
And then-
even if the QR code is wrong,
Right,
you'll detect that in the audit and you
but
can
only
correct it.
if there's an audit and only if they're.
Only if
wrong.
there's an audit, but they're required to go to, at least in Colorado as of 2017, unless they delay it again or repeal it or something like that.
2016 presidential election, yeah.
Yeah, it does, but it was supposed to go into effect 2014 and they missed, yeah.
This is Dominion, this one?
That's the Dominion system. Yeah, let me see if I can find my
Off the
notes on
shelf,
that.
huh?
Yeah, basically, almost all is off the shelf with just custom software, which is a good thing. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Off the shelf.
It's
well,
different from what I saw in December.
Oh, yeah, we had a joystick, right?
And probably because wireless is forbidden in California.
Right.
So,
Or wireless compatible even.
Let me see.
Wireless or wireless compatible.
Do you know how accessible the software is to
Right.
so they have the
people being able to look at it?
whether it's the source, is it?
Yeah,
is
like,
it-
is it open source?
So it's riding on the Android operating system, which is open, but I think that what they're doing on top of that is proprietary. I didn't push on it. I'm imagining that they would have some kind of source code review as part of the certification process, since they are going to do certification. Okay, so here's the,
Phil, let me
Yeah.
respond to that. Not all the apps that even Google supplies or the Android operating system are open source.
right, no, sure, I understand that, but the Android operating system itself is open source, although
Yeah, but it won't
Samsung.
run without some of this other stuff that's not open source.
As part of their process is allowing the local election official to adjudicate ambiguous ballots, and they have some automated process of flagging the ballots that the machine wasn't sure of the interpretation of, and you can do some human overwriting, which is great, because you can improve the quality control and eventually audit the end result.
Right.
That's, is there an exportable log of adjudications? Is there an ability to undo, so forth and so on? It's like, well, yeah. Like,
Maybe.
You sort the images by mark density in order to flag those that you think is not yet. Have they considered doing the adjudication process blind, where you can't actually see the candidate's name, you can only see the vote target and decide whether it is or isn't a vote without seeing? That seems to me like a worthwhile thing to have. Have they considered that? No. How do you ensure, okay, all right, so I mentioned already the problem with the random number generation. Why do you have a QR code at all? Why not just use OCR? QR codes are spooky for voters. Like, well, that's how we decided to do it. What do you do to lock down the tablets to ensure that no radios are active, to be sure that they aren't recording information about the voters, the cameras, etc.? Well, no. What data are exportable? Can you export the CVRs? Well, they claim they can, but I haven't seen the output yet. What do you do to control the scanner configuration? Is it plug and play, or do you build driver software for the printer scanners, et cetera? They're just relying on Canon, whatever Canon supplies.
Yeah.
That can really be a problem. There's a lot of demonstrations of, for example, by default, most scanners have a hole punch filling function where if it sees a black, vaguely circular ovalish thing within some distance of the margin, it will white it out because it thinks it's a 3-hole punch and then it shouldn't be there. If you have an oval vote target, in that range, it will eliminate votes. It will turn votes into non-votes. It will also, even separate from any OCR function, many of these scanners will alter digits in images in a way that is unpredictable. And we're not talking about like OCRing them incorrectly, we're talking about modifying the image at the pixel level.
Optical character
Recognition, yeah.
Meaning
I can show you
text
examples of
image,
that.
turning it into text.
How do you lock down Android on the Samsung tablets? Do you disable all radios? No answer. Do you flash the entire device when you load an election, including the operating system? That is, do you basically start with a clean slate on the device? Well, that's up to the local jurisdictions. Like, you're not issuing best practices, you know. Do you use USB to load the election definitions? If not, how are you loading the election definitions? I think they are using USB to sort of sync them, you know, in some way. When I asked also, is there a low power printer option like thermal printer? Because there are some jurisdictions that want to be able to run on battery power if there's a power failure, whereas laser printers take a lot more juice than a thermal printer. So currently, no. But anyway, that's what I asked them, and the answers were mostly either, no, we haven't thought about that, or it's up to the local election official to figure it out.
They
Anyway.
must have been terrified of you by the time.
Whoops.
Well, it was funny, a bunch of people came up afterwards saying, like, normally we want to talk to the speakers, but we want to talk to you. It's like, they invited me, and they wanted, you know, I mean, surely they're motivated by profit. I mean, they're in the business of doing this, but by the same token, they do seem to recognize that they've got to get their act together around supporting auditing because that's the direction the laws are going. So, and frankly, I think it's great that they're moving towards commercial stuff. I mean, charging, you know, $3,000 for a $50 piece of hardware is just wrong, and that's the way to go.
There's some of this sort of reminds me about 2008 or something. Court was doing the certification review in Sacramento, and the guy got up there and he said, in 2006 there were no guidelines for voting systems.
Interesting.
And then I got up, I said, what do you mean there were no guidelines in 2006? What about the 2005 federal voluntary voting system guidelines? They were there. Don't give us this bullshit.
But they were voluntary.
Yeah, there were no guidelines. It was just
There were
like,
guidelines.
if you'd like to have them.
He a couple times said we had no guidelines. And I no. Everyone else
Yeah.
got caught lying to the Washington legislature.
Yeah,
Oh, just in the last couple of days, it was
Just the
Yeah.
last couple of days.
they lied about Oregon's experience with
Yeah.
online
Yeah,
voting.
that's come out in a couple of places. They misrepresent what their system did, and they lied about what happened in Oregon. Yeah. Yeah. I've been on the phone with Lori, is the CEO, but they were talking about auditing several years ago, and then just kind of dropped it. So, but anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, I didn't mean to